Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Halloween edition of Near and Rupar. I am Aaron Rupar, publisher of Public Notice, and as always, I'm here with David Near, the lead author. I don't know exactly what your title is, probably publisher as well, editor,
Yes, sir.
everything for the down ballot. And we are going to use today's edition primarily as a way to talk about next Tuesday's elections, which we framed in the headline for this episode as a big test for Trump 2.0. Of course, there have been some special elections throughout the year, earlier this year, that have generally not gone great for Republicans and have, kind of been reminders of Democratic strength after an election last year that obviously was pretty demoralizing and, led to some rifts within the party and a lot of hand-wringing among Dems. But we've had a few reminders throughout the year that all is not lost. And these are the first, kind of regular major elections of 2025 of Trump 2.0. And David, stop me if you disagree with any of this, but with what I do for my line of work, I watch a lot of Fox and Newsmax, and every 4 years. I remember it was very much the case back in 2021 as well, when the shoe was kind of on the other foot. Obviously, Joe Biden was president, but I remember Fox making a huge deal out of the Virginia race, especially that year. It seems like it was a very long time ago now, but of course, the issue of the day on Fox was CRT. Which I think now has kind of
Right.
become, part of the, kind of the broader sort of backlash against wokeness, so to speak, kind of a culture war issue. But, the CRT hysteria and kind of the concerns about parents not being involved directly enough in their children's educations was ascribed to be one of the big issues that led Glenn Youngkin to win in a bit of an upset that year in Virginia, which was obviously interpreted among people on the right, at least, as a sign of Joe Biden's weakness. And even in New Jersey that year, where we had the same Republican challenger, Jack Ciattarelli, he lost to Phil Murphy in it wasn't super close, but, I think it was, like
It was
5 or 6 points?
it was like three. Yeah.
Okay, so it's closer than I remember. And, so it's Ciattarelli again this year against Mikey Sherrill, who is a congresswoman running for governor, obviously. And, it's been one of those things on Fox where this story has gotten, or that race has gotten pretty heavy coverage. Ciattarelli is on Fox quite a bit. But it seems like, at the end of the day, they've really seized upon basically one outlier poll that I think had the race at like 5 points, 6 points, something like that, to, kind of portray things as though it's really a nail biter. And I'm not sure there's a ton of evidence that that's the case. Obviously, David, you follow that stuff really close, so let me know if I'm mistaken on that. But, it seems like those are the two that are, nationally at least kind of the most high profile. And then the other race, which we haven't talked about much on the show here, because it's kind of a weird issue, but the Virginia AG race, remind me what the name of the Democratic candidate is there. I'm blanking on that.
That's Jay Jones.
Jay Jones. And he's running against Jason Miyares, who is the
Yes.
current AG. And, things seem to be going pretty well for Jones until within the last 2 or 3 weeks, there was a scandal that broke about text messages he had sent a number of years ago, where you made some remarks about political violence against Republicans that, were meant somewhat seriously to the point where he had to apologize and kind of distance himself from what he had said, but it kind of put Democrats in the awkward spot where, when they've been going on some of the national shows or doing hits on CNN, where they're always asked about this, like, do you call upon him to get out of the race? And most of them have said some variant of, I condemn what he said, but he's apologized, and I don't see it as disqualifying. However, I mean, it seems like the polling on that one has Miyares slightly ahead from what I've seen. So that could end up, it could end up being kind of a split ticket situation where, at the top of the ticket, you have Spanberger running for governor against Winsome Earl Sears. It seems like for Abigail Spanberger, she's in pretty good shape there. So you could have a situation in Virginia where you have a Democratic governor and a Republican AG.
All very possible. But I will say this as a preface. You brought up 2021, and this situation is almost the mirror image, because very typically, as soon as a new president takes over the White House, there is a backlash to that president's party at the polls. This is just a very, very common feature of American politics. And that's what helped sink Terry McAuliffe's campaign in Virginia against Glenn Youngkin 4 years ago, and is why Phil Murphy almost lost to Jack Ciattarelli in what was a real shocker that it was that close at the time. These days, it's kind of back to normal in the sense that Virginia is behaving like the blue leaning state that it is. New Jersey's a little bit different, but the polls have both Spanberger and Sherrill, the two Democratic candidates in both of those states, leading fairly comfortably. Spanberger, in particular, the average, our good buddy G. Elliott Morris launched a new polling aggregator site called 50 plus one, which is really, really helpful. And they have running averages of both of these two races. And in both of these races, in the very last couple of days, things have been trending in Democrats' favor. So, this notion of any kind of tightening, this media narrative that many in the traditional media would very much like to see, it isn't happening. In Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, is up now 11 points on average over Winsome Earl Sears. And that would be just a massive landslide in Virginia, even bigger than Ralph Northam, the Democrats' win in 2017, which also saw a landslide in the state house. We'll talk about that in a minute, too. Um, and in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, she is now up on average about 7 points over Jack Ciattarelli. And you're right, there were a couple of polls. One moment, please. There were a couple of polls that indicated New Jersey was a lot closer. One of them was either a Ciattarelli internal or for an allied group, but the independent polls keep showing Sherrill ahead. And the thing to remember, yes, these are both blue states, but in New Jersey, no party has won more than two straight gubernatorial elections since 1965. So that is a very difficult streak for Sherrill to be going up against. And right now, though, she's still the favorite. Democrats have outspent Republicans by a lot. In Virginia, governors are limited to just one 4-year term. It's the only state in the nation that has this one-term limit. And it's just for the governor, not for the other positions on the ballot. So there's always a lot of there's turnover every 4 years, quite literally. In terms of your question about Miyares, the Republican Attorney General, yeah, he definitely benefited from this scandal that hit Jay Jones. Jay Jones's fundraising dried up for a while, but Miyares, that race, maybe he's a couple of points ahead. For him to actually win, you have to have a huge amount of ticket splitting because if Spanberger is really on track for a 10-point win, then you're talking about a really, really large number of voters willing to vote for Democrat at the top of the ticket and just a little bit further down vote for Republican. And that does happen sometimes, especially more at state races than in federal races. But Jay Jones right now has to be rooting for a big, big Spanberger win because I think if she's winning by double digits, odds are she'll drag Jay Jones along with her.
Yeah, and the other race that I probably should have mentioned up top is the California Proposition 50, which, I mentioned races that are of national significance. And, probably in a lot of ways, the California one actually is because, of course, this is a fight over the congressional maps. It'll be very important next year as we approach the midterm elections. And I know in the email you sent over kind of prepping for this episode, David, you mentioned that it seems like the forces who are against Proposition 50, the Republicans basically have kind of punted on this at this point where the polling indicates that it's in good shape and the spending has kind of dried up on the no side. So then, and maybe, so assuming all that is true, which I think it is because I read from your email, then I guess the question is, so the legislature then again will have to they have to take another action on the maps for next year. Or is it
No.
just okay, so it's done after
Yeah.
that then?
So here's the subtle genius, if you will, behind Proposition 50. So California, as viewers likely know, has an independent redistricting commission that's in the state constitution. So state lawmakers can't just draw a new map. So they had to put another amendment before voters saying, would you like to revisit the commission and temporarily put in place a new map to counter what's going on with all this Trump gerrymanders in Texas, Missouri, elsewhere. North Carolina. And the brilliant thing about this amendment is that it includes the map with it. So if the amendment passes, then boom, the new map is already in place. And the reason why that's important is because that allows elections to start taking place under these new district lines. And things are going to change a lot because, you have 5 districts Republican districts that Democrats are targeting to make bluer in varying degrees, some by a little and some by a lot. And so all kinds of new candidates are going to want to launch campaigns as soon as this map passes. So there's no extra holdup. There's no like wait. There's no like the legislature has to reconvene and then pass a new map. November 4th, boom, it's done. And it's game on with a totally new map for California, which I think that the California map is more effective than the Texas GOP map, by the way. There is a very good chance that some Democrats hold on in the Texas map. The California map really puts the screws to Republicans, and they could very well flip all 5 seats that they're targeting.
Well, let me mention that as we do each week, we will take questions as they come in. You do have to be a paid subscriber for either of our publications, or ideally both. But if you have any questions about anything related to next Tuesday's elections, maybe races that we haven't talked about yet. Obviously, David tracks pretty much everything, so this would be a good opportunity to do that.
Try to
Just put
stump
them in
me.
the. Yeah, you can try to stump him. I doubt that will
It
be
happens.
successful. Because I know you're on top of pretty much everything. But so yeah, this is a good opportunity if you have questions. And I suppose kind of dovetailing from that, I mentioned these races that have gotten a lot of attention: New Jersey, Virginia, and California. Any other races that you're tracking, David, especially as being important for one reason or another, either because maybe it's a bellwether of things to come, or just that are reflecting in interesting ways on particular issues. What's on your radar for next week?
That's an excellent question, and I saw that in the comments, someone asked about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court race, and I'm so glad
Oh, good.
uh, that question came up because that's an underappreciated set of elections that I really do want to talk about. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has 7 members. Democrats have a 5-2 majority, and this Democratic majority has issued a lot of really important rulings, including in favor of voting rights, and also a number of years ago struck down the GOP's gerrymandered congressional map and put in place a fair map that led to an evenly divided delegation, which makes sense because Pennsylvania is one of the ultimate swing states. 3 of those Democratic justices are now up for what's known as a retention election. And this differs from a traditional election. It's used a lot for judges. And in a retention election, voters are simply asked, do you want to keep this person in office for another term? Yes or no. You don't face a candidate against you. You don't have any kind of opponent. It's just simply an up or down vote. And in one sense, that makes it really easy for your opponents because they can attack you without having to worry about putting up a flawed candidate against you. They can just purely go on the attack. But Democrats definitely appear to have the upper hand here. We don't really have any useful polling here. These are very difficult races to poll, but the spending tells a real story. And Democrats had been worried that the richest man in Pennsylvania, conservative megadonor Jeff Yass, would show up with $1 billion at the end and just try to pound Democrats. And that never happened. His groups affiliated with him have spent a bunch. I mean, we're talking in the millions of dollars, but nothing like what we saw, for instance, with Elon Musk in Wisconsin earlier this year. So the body language from Democrats is positive in Pennsylvania. And if all 3 win retention, then the Democrats maintain their 5-2 majority. If they lose retention, then things get very complicated. You'd wind up with 3 vacant seats temporarily and a 2-2 tie on the Supreme Court. I don't think we need to get into all of that. If that should happen, maybe we'll certainly address that in our newsletter. But right now, Democrats are looking good. And I got to say, this also really matters for redistricting in the coming decade. You got to play the long game here. The state Supreme Court plays a huge role in both redistricting at the congressional level and legislative level. So ensuring that Democrats retain control of the court will help ensure that Pennsylvania retains fair maps into the 2030s.
Yeah, and maybe another race that we should at least mention because it's gotten a lot of attention, both nationally. I was going to say internationally, maybe a little bit internationally. Is Mamdani in
Of
New York
course,
City,
yes.
the mayoral race there? It seems like the cake is kind of baked there once Mamdani hit over 50% in polling, because there was a thought for a while that if everybody dropped out and kind of made it, a binary between Como and Mamdani, that maybe then, it could be more of like a coin flip situation. But, I've seen polls that has Mamdani over, 52, 53%. So is that kind of your read too, that it seems like, I don't think there's been a single poll that's ever showed him even like really close to any of the other with Curtis Silwa. Is that how it's pronounced, or Sliwa?
Sliwa, Sliwa,
Sliwa,
Sliwa.
who's kind of a perpetual Fox News character, being the Republican candidate. Although it's very funny that I'm sure you've probably seen this too, that there's been a number of occasions where Trump has been asked if he's going to endorse Sliwa, and he's kind of, he calls him like a clown, and that he's not ready for prime time and all this stuff, and just very denigrating comments for a fellow Republican who has defended him a lot on Fox. So I guess that kind of shows how loyalty is a one-way street with Trump. But
Of course.
yeah, it's even Cuomo. I've noticed he was on Maria Bartiromo's show earlier this week.
Oh
He was
God.
on
Yeah.
CNN today. I mean, it seems like he's trying to get out there and kind of make one last push. But when you're on Maria Bartiromo's show, I'm not exactly sure how many New Yorkers are watching that. I mean, it seems to me like more of a play for whatever's next after this election. But it seems like Mamdani is in good shape there.
Yeah, you're right about the polling. The polling is all favored Mamdani, and you're also right. The real question is he going to hit 50? And personally, I'm rooting for him to hit 50. Why? Because the media narrative that would ensue if he gets 48 or 49% would be just so damn annoying. Trump doesn't win a majority of the vote. Again, is still considered to have a mandate, and the media loves running with that. God forbid a Democrat gets 49% of the votes, he'd be totally trashed as illegitimate or whatever. Garbage. Obviously, it's not how our elections work. A mandate doesn't mean anything. But it would be nice to see Mamdani hit that score, just to shut up the naysayers. Yeah, but you're right. This has been baked for quite some time. I mean, Cuomo basically just signed up to humiliate himself yet again. And it's kind of baffling, but at the same time, it also makes sense because this guy's a massive narcissist and he doesn't know anything except for holding office or being in politics. And he's obviously just desperately trying to cling to power. Sliwa, meanwhile, has been extremely colorful in explaining why he won't drop out. He views Cuomo as disgusting and corrupt. True. And has said, like, over my dead body in many, many ways, but like much more colorful than that. He said, like, he compared himself to freaking William Wallace in Braveheart, saying that, if they were, executing me at the end like that, and said, we'll stop the execution if you drop out and endorse Cuomo. I'd say, impale me. That's what he said.
Wow.
um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I think that this one is pretty done. And you mentioned Cuomo going on Bartiromo. There's been some really racist, disgusting stuff coming from Cuomo and his allies in the final weeks of this campaign. Stupid fear mongering about Mamdani, and Muslims in general. And God, I mean, like, even talking about, basically suggesting like he's not a real Democrat, even though he's a Democratic nominee. He's not a real New Yorker because his family are immigrants. I mean, like, really, like, the immigrant experience is central to New York. So yeah, this one has gotten a lot of attention, obviously, and Republicans are going to try to make Mamdani a thing in elections next year. I really question how well that will work, but I don't think there's going to be too much excitement on this front on Tuesday night.
Yeah, and it's quite a remarkable fall for Cuomo, who, I really started paying attention to him during COVID when he was doing his daily briefings. And, there was kind of the sense that, he was really standing up to Trump and being tough, and, that he was a really skilled communicator. And, it was such a contrast, the Cuomo briefings from the Trump ones, which were happening at the same time, where, like, that
Right.
was when Trump was telling people to inject bleach and all this crazy stuff. And obviously, a lot of the misconduct that the nation came to know about a little bit later was already occurring and just hadn't really percolated up to my radar screen yet. But then, to run this kind of doomed race from the beginning, and just drag his name through the mud one more time, it really is, kind of an ugly way to go out, because I can't imagine him really running for anything meaningful again after this. Although we did get a question here from Marlis, who asked, what about the main election on the voter ID
Yes.
referendum? It would end mail-in voting, among other things. David, I'll kick that to you.
I'm also super glad that this question was asked as well. There are two statewide ballot measures in Maine. I'll mention both of them. So this voting rights one, it wouldn't completely end mail-in voting, but it would make it much, much harder. And it would have a very serious impact, particularly on folks who already find it difficult to vote, like the disabled and the elderly, among other things. In Maine right now, if you want to get an absentee ballot every year sent to you automatically, there's a list that you join, and you put in your name once, and they send you a ballot every year. Many, many states do this. And this ballot measure would eliminate that list. You'd have to request a ballot every single year. You also wouldn't be able to request online or by phone, which is just absurd. You would Towns would be limited to only setting out one mail ballot drop box. And then the other piece of this that proponents have most heavily leaned into is that it would impose a voter ID requirement. Of all these things, voter ID tends to be the most popular. And so they're trying to hang their hat on that one and emphasize that. Obviously, opponents have been emphasizing all of the many, many voting restrictions that this would impose. The opponents of this measure have far outspent proponents, so that's one piece of good news for voting rights. There's only been one poll of this ballot measure, and I want to emphasize ballot measures are often really, really difficult to poll. It's very different from candidate polling, and that poll showed a total toss up with like 49% to 48%. I can't remember exactly which, very few undecideds. So if that's right, this could wind up being really, really narrow. There's another ballot measure on the ballot in Maine that would establish a red flag law. Many states have these laws. They allow for streamlining the process for removing guns from dangerous individuals. And this one also, the one poll showed a close race, so with a lot more undecideds. Once again, the supporters of this measure, in other words, the people who want to establish the red flag law, have outspent their opponents. But one of the opponents, very strangely, Aaron, is Governor Janet Mills, who, of course, is running for Senate. Now, maybe it's not that strange. Maybe she somehow thinks that, walking some tightrope on red flag laws would boost her against Susan Collins in a general election. Maybe this is actually what she believes. Who the hell knows? But she published an op-ed opposing this. But the Democrats broadly seem to be in favor of this law.
Yeah, I saw she was also in the news recently for kind of embracing the filibuster, or at least saying that she wouldn't be interested in reforming it. Which I saw a lot of upset, I guess, for lack of a better word, on the
Yeah.
left that is kind of angling to be like Joe Manchin 2.0 or something like that. We can get into the main primary another time because there is a lot going
Yeah,
on
there's
there.
so much
But
to unpack there. I
yeah.
refuse. I refuse to do that
Okay,
today.
we'll table it for a week where there's a little bit less going on. But I guess one question I have. So we're talking about these races that are largely in blue states, New Jersey, California, Virginia. So that makes it if even if the Dems have a really good night in those states, there's going to be kind of a sense of like, well, those are blue states anyway. Are there any races that are in more like kind of swing states or red states that have some peril for Republicans? Because I could see that being the sort of thing where if a Dem can win in a state that Trump carried last year or in a strong Trump area, because I'm interested for what we could take from next Tuesday in terms of like sort of the broader politics of our nation. Obviously, there's a sense that Trump's popularity is that kind of a low ebb right now. I mean, just before we logged on, or if you saw that, he's tweeting about the marble renovations of the Lincoln
I did
bathroom.
see that.
Yeah, where it's like, SNAP benefits are going away for like 40 million people tomorrow, and that's what he's tweeting about. I mean, it's almost like a parody of tone deafness, where if you were kind of writing like a bumbling, out of touch billionaire politician, it'd be pretty much what Trump was tweeting this afternoon. So I'd love to see signs next week that things are kind of turning for him, and I just don't know really where to look. So what would you say about that?
The answer is there are a ton more elections beyond just those few that we mentioned. Obviously, those are the marquee races. But on Monday, if you're a down ballot subscriber, or if you're not yet a down ballot subscriber, we'll be sending out our preview of all of the top races, and that's has about like 40 races on it. But there are actually like hundreds more. Our good friend Daniel Nichanian at Bolts Magazine has put together a cheat sheet with like hundreds of local races. But so there's a couple things to look at. First, I would say never just look at who wins and who loses. You have to look at the margin, because if you wind up winning a race that you should have won, but only in a squeaker, well, that's, potentially a troubling sign. I, liken it to a basketball or a baseball game. If you're the superior team, and you only win by a bucket over, one of the basement dwellers in the league, boy, maybe that's not a good sign for how strong you actually are. But if you blow out that team as you should, then that is a positive sign. So if Spanberger, as I was mentioning, for instance, is winning by 10, that's a really strong sign because Kamala Harris, only won Virginia by 6 points last year. So you have to look at things in context. But there are also quite a few elections in much swingier places. And one that I want to flag for folks in particular, actually, two, are in Georgia. Georgia is hosting two statewide special elections for its Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission, a lot of states have these. In Georgia, it's a 5-member board that regulates utilities, and all 5 members on that board are Republicans and have been for quite some time. But for a variety of reasons, long running litigation, some elections got delayed. And so two Republican held seats are on the ballot next week in swing state Georgia, which, as we know, Biden won narrowly and then Trump won just last year. There's been some really interesting reporting in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about just how worried Republicans are about these two races. And, we have there are big elections coming up next year, both for the Senate, John Ossoff is up, and also the governor's race, Brian Kemp, the Republican, is term limited. So these could provide a window into where the Georgia electorate is headed next year. But if Democrats can pull off a couple of upsets in a swing state in an odd numbered year like in Georgia, that would be a very positive sign. And also, they would even have the chance to win back the majority on the Public Service Commission next year when there's a regularly scheduled election. So I would definitely keep an eye on those. And here's a real tell, Aaron, that I think is important. We haven't really talked much about the messaging that the various sides are using, but in Georgia, the Republicans, at least one of the two Republican candidates, is pursuing an openly, overtly racist campaign against his
Mm.
opponent, who you'll be shocked to learn is a black woman. He's called her, of course, the DEI candidate. And he said, I'm not engaged in a dog whistle. This is just a whistle. Like, he's
Wow.
proudly embracing his racism here. If those are definitely a couple to watch, especially if you're rooting for racists to go down.
Yeah. What is the for an election like that, the turnout usually like? I mean, especially since that's kind of a not a very sexy office. I could see it
No.
being very, very low. And then from that, if turnout is low, I could see it being kind of difficult to extrapolate in terms of, the sample wouldn't be representative like what the midterm election will look like.
No, that's a very fair question. I would expect turnout to be exceedingly low, in particular because at least in Virginia and New Jersey, these are states that are accustomed to holding statewide elections in odd numbered years. Georgia
Yeah.
is not, and the only other
Mm.
stuff on the ballot, there are some, local elections. Atlanta has a mayoral race that's basically totally uncontested. The mayor there should win another term in a rout. So yeah, that does raise questions. How comparable is a November 2025 electorate with a November 2026 electorate? And we have seen in the Trump era that Democrats tend to do better when turnout is lower. So
Yeah.
what I would say is mentally, you may want to, discount some of that. You may be tempted to do that, but also it's just very hard to draw a straight comparison because there's every chance that the midterms go even worse for Republicans. I mean, with the way that things are headed now, the bottom line is that if Democrats win those two Georgia races, Republicans are going to be upset and worried, regardless of what the shape of the electorate looks like. Look, you can engage in all the copium you want after the fact. If you lose a race, it's not representative. The candidate was bad. Previous candidate was bad. This, that, and the other thing, the shutdown, yada, yada. But, if you're the one making excuses, you're the one making excuses. And what does that say about you?
Yeah, and that's interesting what you said about just the racist nature of one of the Republican campaigns in Georgia. I wonder, obviously since you track all these races very closely, does that still kind of stick out as a bit of an outlier, or have you noticed Republicans kind of leaning into that more, which would not surprise me given kind of the tone from the White House, and we talked about CRT earlier and how that kind of rolled right into the DEI stuff, and these are all very coded terms, of course. So I'm curious if that sort of campaigning is becoming more of a normal thing for Republican candidates, or if that still kind of sticks out.
I mean, it sticks out because, in a way, because of just this guy's quote talking about
Yeah.
just saying that the whole, this is not a dog whistle, this is a whistle. Um, but these kinds of racist campaign tactics are exceedingly common among
Mm,
Republicans. I mean, we were just talking about the stuff that they're throwing at Mamdani in
yeah.
New York City. So sometimes I guess this is in a way part of the problem, that because they have embraced racism to such a huge extent, Republicans have helped normalize it. And that's one of the darkest through lines, I think, of the entire Trump era. And it makes it harder and harder for these kinds of racist attacks to actually stick out. So, but what that means, though, is that when you have some guy who's spewing a line like this, like, whoa, we really stand up and take notice. But I got to say, it's not like this story made headlines around the country. We elevated it. Even the AJC, which was an excellent reporting on this, that wasn't like the centerpiece of, that quote wasn't the centerpiece of their story, though they have, very much focused on this candidate's, I'm forgetting his name, and I don't want to get it wrong. They have very much focused on this candidate's, the kind of campaign that he's running. So yeah, the racism is still omnipresent from Republicans.
Yeah. Have you been surprised at all with how much Trump has kind of stayed out of these races? He might have mentioned Citarelli's name like once or twice, but I think part of it in Virginia, at least, was the sense that he didn't want to sort of jump on a sinking ship with the Republican candidates there. I mean, he won't even really mention Winsome Earl Sears by name. I think he's kind of said something like, the Republican candidate there's a good candidate, but, oddly kind
Right,
of avoiding saying her name. So,
right, right.
I don't know. I mean, that to me struck me as a little bit odd, although again, I can't remember Biden really getting super involved in 2021 in the gubernatorial race there. So, maybe these are just kind of a little bit below the radar. Although I should say, obviously, Trump has
No.
been heavily invested in, kind of pillarizing Mamdani as so, the Democratic Party is being taken over by communists and they're going to have to go through the White House and, sort of using him as like a totem of, where the Democratic Party is heading, not because he necessarily thinks that he's going to lose or has any ability to affect that race directly, though he's tried. But more because, it's just kind of a useful bit of culture warring that he can do. But with some of these other races, it seems like he stayed out of it.
Yeah, it's always so hard to predict and understand when and why Trump makes endorsements. I think mostly he likes to side with winners, and honestly, I think he mostly prefers to endorse in GOP primaries, because his influence is so strong in those. Though his track record is far from perfect, and he loves to take credit for those wins. Yeah, inserting himself into any of these races, as you were noting earlier, they're taking place in blue-leaning states. So I don't know how helpful it would be. I
Yeah.
think that he did endorse Miyares, the AG in Virginia, though don't quote me on that. It's been a particular issue, especially in New Jersey. Chitterelli in his primary very closely embraced Trump. Trump endorsed him. He won the primary in a walk. And Mikey Sherrill has run tons and tons of ads trying to link Chitterelli with Trump. I don't necessarily know if that's the most effective strategy, but I don't know that it's not effective.
Yeah.
We'll find out on Tuesday. But yeah, I also think that these are really all state level races, and Trump seems much more focused on, understandably, on congressional races, which is why he's pushing for all of these new gerrymanders. So yeah, maybe just things like governor's races just don't excite him as much.
Yeah. It has been notable that Citarelli has parroted some of the ridiculousness that Trump pushes about wind energy and some of the wind farms killing the whales off the coast of New Jersey. I don't know if that's stuff that he just says when he's on Fox to because he's trying to speak their language. But is that like a significant issue for New Jersey voters? Kind of I'm sure energy broadly is and energy prices, but
Yeah.
again, this my exposure is mainly through watching right wing TV. So when someone like Citarelli goes on Fox, they ask him about stuff like that, not necessarily,
Right, right.
issues that might be even more heavily localized, but not of interest to a broader audience.
Yeah, the cost of energy bills is a major issue. New Jersey has seen a particularly rough spike, and I think that is probably of much greater concern than Trump's absurd fantasies. In Virginia, though, I wanted to touch on something because you reminded me about this, talking about CRT, this critical race theory buzzword that the GOP adopted 4 years ago, and then basically stopped talking about ever since. But in Virginia, what Winsome Earl Sears and the Republicans have been doing has been running tons of disgusting anti-trans attacks. And those are, I think, also very closely related to that whole CRT business because, the hook that they tend to hang their hat on is, about kids, girls' sports, schools, kids transitioning without telling their parents, and things like that. And that relates to the whole school panic about CRT. And what the polls are telling us is that these ads are simply not effective. And,
Hmm.
since 2024, there's been this frustrating and really dismaying conversation that has happened among some Democrats where some Democratic politicians essentially want to throw trans folks under the bus because they think that that's what cost Democrats the election in 2024. And I think that's an incredibly simplistic and basically wrong reading. But what's going to happen is Spanberger is almost certainly going to win. She's almost certainly going to win by a large margin. And what we won't see are 1,000 think pieces saying, "Oh, Republican attacks on, trans people and trans kids didn't work. Republicans have to choose a new message. Democrats are right to stand up for trans kids." I mean, like that is what should happen, and we're not going to see that happen. But it's really important
Hmm.
for Democrats to pay attention to that lesson because the GOP part of their continual problem is that they find something that works for a little while and then they beat it into the ground and then it stops working because circumstances change. And if Republicans want to stick with these disgusting, deplorable attacks, they can and they will. And that might actually be good for Democrats next year because I don't think it's going to move voters in the way that they think it does.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that asymmetry that you comment on, where when Democrats lose races, there's like this kind of endless kind of
Can't
reflections and
agree.
unpacking of, where did the messaging go wrong and what can we do to appeal to these voters that we lost. And Republicans never really do that. I mean, I remember after the 12 election when Romney lost, there was the autopsy that, basically, I don't know who put it together, but was kind of pushing the party to actually move more to the center on immigration and, kind
Yep.
of, push for, let's have more people get kind of legalized status or have a better pathway to citizenship. And of course, Trump ended up taking the party in the absolute opposite direction. And now here we are where, they control all the levers of power in the federal government. So, and even today I was kind of reflecting, this came a little bit earlier, but in the context of like, all of the analysis of Democratic campaigning and messaging, and are they focusing enough on affordability? And then you have Trump flying to his golf club in Florida as 40 million people are going to lose food assistance tomorrow, tweeting about the new marble bathroom in the White House, and it's like, if a Democratic president tried to do that, it would be they'd be impeached
Forget it.
on Monday, right? And so there is
Yep.
kind of interesting asymmetry where with Democratic campaigns, there's like, we want them to be kind of workshopped, and they're very, we approach them very rationally and kind of analyze them. But then with Republican campaigns, it's kind of more on the level of like id or something, and they never really question their priors, and no one seriously considers the possibility that next year they'll kind of take a step back from bigotry and lean back into economic policy or something. That's just not what the party is. So that is, it's a very interesting. It's not new this year, but I think we see that cropping up again as we head into next Tuesday.
There's no doubt in my mind that affordability remains central for many, many, many voters. And that's what the 2024 election almost certainly turned on. And not only has that things not gotten better on that front, they've gotten worse. And whatever happens Tuesday, Trump will disavow all responsibility for it. But Republicans are not going to change their approach. And there's probably very, very little that they actually could do. I mean, the very fact that Trump is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to destroy part of the White House and build this ballroom, it's not just a visual image. It shows you where their priorities are, and I think that story really has broken through in a particular way. So I don't see them as having any realistic way of dealing with the affordability crisis. And it really is amazing how powerful that issue is because Trump essentially ran on inflation last year and won. And then you see someone who could not be more opposite in every way, like Zoran Mamdani, also centering this as the number one, two, three, and four issue of his campaign for mayor of New York City. It really is a topic that works everywhere, and it plays very strongly to folks who are non incumbents, to the party that's out of power, and it plays very, very poorly for the party that is in power. Well, guess who's in power?
Yeah, and sometimes when people say the Trump run ran on affordability thing, it kind of makes me feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I watched all of his rallies, and that really was not. It was mainly kind of the
Fair.
the hatred towards immigrants, the transphobia, the retribution. I think part of it was that people who kind of covered the race for reputable outlets, like that's kind of what they wanted to hear because the other stuff was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
harder to engage with because you sounded biased or you sounded liberal. Now I don't doubt that a lot of voters were upset about the economy and thought that change was needed, and so Trump was changed in that case. But it's a little bit of an aside. But I
Yeah.
still hear
That
people
might
say
be a
that, and
better
to
way of
me,
putting it.
right, right. But certainly Mamdani, I think, has done kind of
Yes.
he put on a masterclass in terms of staying focused on affordability, and I think it's hard to extrapolate from the New York electorate to what the national electorate looks like. But in terms of running a campaign that is focused on an issue that isn't super polarizing, that affects everybody, that you can address with policy solutions in ways that will improve people's lives. I mean, hopefully that is a big takeaway that Democrats will take from his presumably successful campaign at this point, that there's a way to run a campaign that's kind of policy based, that's inclusive, that doesn't alienate people, and is focused on issues that really matter and affect people's lives.
You're absolutely right about Trump. I think I was probably perceiving things more from the way I think many voters did,
Yeah.
and it certainly seems like Trump is almost this tabula rasa that many voters are willing to take whatever it is that they want from him. I mean, I remember reading comments from one woman who voted for him last year because Trump promised that he was going to make IVF free, which of course was absurd and not really something that he ran on heavily. But this was something that appealed to this particular woman. She probably heard it once and thought that was great, and now she's of course bitterly disappointed. And that in a way seems to be a unique phenomenon of Trump because he's willing to say anything and promise anything. People are willing to listen to just the parts that they want to hear from him, and very few other politicians ever operate that way. And you said Mamdani's put on a master class on affordability. It's absolutely right. And I think part of the reason, or maybe the reason why it's been so effective is because he stayed so focused. Because normal politicians have to stay focused on maybe one, two, maybe three things at the most to be able to get their message through. It's only Trump who seems to have this superpower of putting a billion messages out there and benefiting from that. You
Mhm.
really do have to stay focused, and Mamdani showing how to do it and how to have fun doing it.
Yeah, and I will also add that I think he's done a really great job with the communications aspect. And obviously, anybody who's watched his social media videos, I mean, he's very charismatic, and he has a presence on camera. But then he even went on Fox a couple weeks ago, and Fox tried to do kind of the typical ambush style interview, but he was really, really good. At one point, he even said, "Mr. President, you're probably watching. Let me address you directly." And he kind of made a plea that if you want to work with me on affordability, we can partner on that. But if you come after New York, I will fight you on that. So he really on kind of checked all of those boxes. He was nobody that I had ever heard of before this campaign, and setting aside some of the controversy about things that he has said in the past. I mean, when you take his campaign for what it was, I thought it was really, really well done, and all indications are that will pay off next week with what seems to be like a pretty resounding victory in the mayoral race there. So that's probably a good note to leave it on for today. Over 900 people with us, so thank you for joining and asking questions as always. And when we come back next Friday, I'm
I
sure
need
we'll
to
have. Oh yeah,
I
David,
ne-
go ahead.
oh, I need to drop in with a plug for our coverage that's coming up at the Down Ballot. So if you're not
Mhm.
a Down Ballot subscriber, we cover all of these elections that Aaron and I were talking about, including many, many more, much further down the ballot. There's also a couple of legislative special elections and some swingy districts that you're going to want to pay attention to. On Monday, as I mentioned, we are going to send out our preview guide. We'll also have a cheat sheet, a live Google Doc that will update on election night on Tuesday, keeping track of all of these top races in one place. And I will be hosting a live stream with my other podcast co host, David Beard, and G. Elliott Morris, polling
Oh
and
wow.
data expert from Strength in Numbers, on Tuesday night, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go live right here on the Substack app, just like always. And so please tune in then. We'll also try to take your questions then. There were a lot of really excellent questions about races that I really wanted to talk about today. So I really appreciate those. I'm very sorry if we
Yeah.
didn't get to them, but Aaron, I think you were saying that next week we'll
Yes,
recount
absolutely.
everything that.
And the other thing that's so wonderful about David's coverage is that I've been running into this a lot where, you will have kind of newsy blurbs from local coverage of that. And the thing, like these days, the local coverage, which, I totally understand why outlets do this, but it's paywalled almost entirely. And so, support David for another reason, then I'm sure your your budget for subscriptions has to be many thousands of dollars, just for all the local coverage. But, it's a great place actually to get that because, unfortunately, I mean, I'd love to support I'm subscribed to dozens and dozens of outlets, but I can't subscribe to every single one. But
No,
obviously, in your line of work, you really have to be, and so you really kind of surface a lot of things that I want to read, or I'll see like a tweet and click on it, and then it's
yeah,
paywall, and
yeah,
it's like, but you have it, and
yeah,
so your coverage is both very very thorough, but then also it's pretty quick, and you can kind of get in and out of it, and so especially for these down ballot races that don't make it up to the cable networks that aren't necessarily going to be covered by New York
yeah,
Times or Wall Street Journal, that is where the down ballot really shines. So yeah, definitely subscribe to down ballot if you're not already a subscriber ahead of Monday. Sounds like Tuesday will be a really big night for you guys, and I'm sure you will have a lot of coverage throughout the week with takeaways and analysis and all
yeah.
sorts of good stuff. And then we will be back next Friday, a week from today. Maybe answering any questions that people may have coming out of the elections. And, we didn't even mention the word shutdown really this week. Maybe once or twice we did, but we'll talk about
I don't
that
think we
and
did.
much more. Yeah. So there you go. That's probably the first episode in 6 or 7 weeks that we can say that. So
Yeah.
anyway, thanks
All
for
right.
everybody. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next Friday.
Happy Halloween.